Hello and welcome to We the People. A headline-grabbing issue is back in the spotlight. Some BJP politicians are planning to introduce private members' population control bills in this Parliament's monsoon session on the heels of BJP leaders in Uttar Pradesh, in Karnataka and Assam suggesting the need to impose population control measures. Now, in the past, BJP nominated MP has introduced a private members bill in the Rajya Sabha seeking to enforce a two-child norm in India. The UP Law Commission has drafted a UP Pollution Control Stabilization and Welfare Bill 2021. Under this, anyone who has more than 2 children can be denied government jobs, can be denied a place in government departments, etc. No person can stand in local body elections or get a seat in the state's legislative assembly. Many of these private bills that have been advocated in the past, that have been introduced or talked about in the past, suggested in the past, advocate penalties like reduction in subsidies on loans, reduction in benefits under the public distribution system, that's like rations, and higher than normal interest rates for availing loans from banks, etc. Once on World Population Day, the BJP Union Minister Giriraj Singh, who's known for making controversial remarks, called for families with more than 2 children to be stripped of voting rights. Remember, that's a fundamental right of every Indian. But he says this is a way of combating India's burgeoning population. Okay, now on the other hand, according to the latest UN data, India at about 1.3 billion is the second most populated country in the world, and not for long. We're supposed to surpass China and become the world's most populated in a year by 2023, that's right. So, while India needs to put a check on its population growth, is this the solution? Are aggressive steps needed? What kind of aggressive steps are needed to control population? And do we need to penalize people, or do we need better governance, education, more access to contraception? That's the question on We the People tonight. All right, we're going to go across to our show, but I have some young people over here, young Indians. Can I just get your quick responses on what you think about population control bills?
My name is Jahagirdar. I'm a mass comm student only. So I have a question. So when जैसे हमें बताया गया अभी, what about the sex education? What about जिस बारे में बात होती नहीं है, sex education, reproduction? What about the pros and cons? जब अगर 2 से ज़्यादा बच्चे अगर
हाँ बोलिए, अगर 2 से ज़्यादा बच्चे
अगर पैदा होते हैं तो उनका वोटिंग राइट छीन लिया जाएगा, तो वो ठीक है. पर what about the pros and cons of more than 2? What about the sex education?
I think the first thing, sex education. That's a very important point. The youth is asking. Pass on the mic. Anyone else who has a quick response? Pass on the mic, sir.
Hello, ma'am. I am Shushmita Singh. Ma'am, we are the second biggest population. तो 2024 में UN की रिपोर्ट आई है कि हम फर्स्ट पे आने वाले हैं. हाँ. तो मैम, मेरा सवाल ये कि सरकार ये बिल लाती है, उससे प्रॉब्लम क्या है? ये तो हर किसी के लिए, किसी जाति धर्म से उठ के, तो सबके लिए, तो हमें तो इसका वेलकम करना चाहिए. तो इसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या है? ये बिल तो अच्छा.
Let's try and discuss that on the show.
Ma'am, I think apart from education about a certain thing, there is also mentality of certain strata of people that because they are in minority in our country, so they tend to be in majority. They give birth to more.
Are you talking about the Muslim community?
Yeah.
Okay, but you know the statistics and the facts show that that's not always the case. Yes, religion is
always,
let's get one thing clear. Religion does play a role, but more important is poverty. People who are uneducated, people who are poor, women who do not have access to their control over their own bodies have more children than people who do. So you could be a rich, educated Muslim who would have less children. Yeah. You could be a poor, uneducated Hindu and have more children. We should get the facts right. Anybody else? All right, let's bring in our panelists right now. First and foremost, I have Ambar Zaidi joining us on the show. She filed a petition in the Supreme Court for population controlled and family planning. And in the end, this led to the court speaking to the centre, saying that more should be done on this. Amber Zaidi ji, I don't want to ask you ki why do we need to introduce this bill? We all know India is one of the most populated countries in the world. I want to ask you, what do you think will happen? Will this actually solve the problem?
Absolutely yes, because we know that India, how the population of our country is on the verge of population explosion. And as per the UN report that you were discussing in the very beginning, that our country's population is going to surpass China as the world's most populous country next year, by the next year. My point in my petition is that how many children needs to be produced, that should be a woman's choice, access to her body, and how many children and the gender of the children also, because are being forced to produce a male child, and I have seen many young women losing their life just to produce a male baby. And also there are many other issues that women face during the pregnancy: malnutrition, not getting the access on medicines.
All right, hold on. Will you hold on? We have Mr. Rajendra Agarwal joining us on the phone line. He is a BJP MP, one of them who's actually introducing in Parliament a population control bill. Mr. Agarwal ji, thank you. मैं आपसे ये नहीं पूछूंगी कि आपने ये बिल क्यों इंट्रोड्यूस कर रहे हो, क्योंकि सबको पता है इंडिया इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट पॉपुलेटेड कंट्रीज ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. मैं ये पूछना चाहती हूँ कि ऐसे बिलों से क्या होने वाली है, क्या हो सकती है, बदलाव क्या हो सकती है?
देखिए, ये जो बिल है ये भी एक प्रकार की जनाकांक्षा को प्रकट करते हैं. मुझे ध्यान है 15वीं लोकसभा के अंदर कांग्रेस के बड़े सीनियर लीडर हैं श्री जयप्रकाश अग्रवाल जी, वो पार्लियामेंट के अंदर वो लोकसभा के सदस्य थे और उन्होंने भी प्राइवेट बिल उन्होंने भी रखा था, बड़ी चर्चा हुई थी उसके ऊपर खूब. तो यानी ये जो विषय है विभिन्न दलों के सदस्यों के द्वारा दोनों हाउसेज के अंदर ये प्राइवेट बिल के रूप में रखे जाते हैं और वो नेचुरली जो जनाकांक्षा है उनके क्षेत्र के अंदर भी लोग उनसे मिलते हैं, उनको भी कुछ ध्यान में आता है कि जितना जनसंख्या के कारण से संसाधनों पर लोड पड़ रहा है, हम उसको साथ चलने में हम अपने को असफल पाते हैं या कटाई उसमें हो रही है.
नहीं सर, मेरी क्वेश्चन ये है अग्रवाल जी, मेरी क्वेश्चन ये है कि सरकार क्या कर रही है टू हेल्प वुमेन एंड टू हेल्प फैमिलीज टू कीप देयर पॉपुलेशन डाउन. बिल से तो कुछ नहीं होने वाला है, कोऑर्डिनेटिव प्रैक्टिस से तो कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. देखिए, केरला, तमिलनाडु, हिमाचल प्रदेश, वेस्ट बंगाल, देयर आर स्टेट्स दैट हैव मैनेज्ड टू ब्रिंग डाउन देयर ग्रोथ रेट्स. थोड़े स्टेट्स है जो नहीं कर पाए हैं, एंड एक्चुअली मोस्ट ऑफ देम आर लाइक बीजेपी स्टेट्स लाइक यूपी एंड आसाम. वहां पे एजुकेशन कम है.
एक सरकार भी एक बिल को अभी विचार कर रही है कि जो मैरिज की शादी की जो उम्र है उसको 18 से 21 किया जाए, और उसके अंदर ये भी है कि विमेन स्ट्रेंथनिंग की भी बात है, उनको ताकत मिले, और साथ ही साथ उसका असर इस रूप में भी पड़ेगा कि जो जनसंख्या है उसके अंदर थोड़ी सी उसके अंदर नियंत्रण भी आएगा, लोग जिम्मेदार बनेंगे. तो इस प्रकार के उपाय सरकार भी कर रही है, माल न्यूट्रिशन इत्यादि को लेकर के भी सजग भी कर रही है. लेकिन कई बार कानून बनाने के लिए यदि सरकार पहल करती है तो उसके अंदर बहुत सारे इशू एक दूसरे सभी हमारा जो देश है वो विविधता का देश है, बड़ी डाइवर्सिटी का देश है. उसमें बहुत सारी चीजों को
I'm glad you've mentioned this. Yes, one way to help the situation would be to increase the marriageable age. Of course, that could be controversial. I'm sure we'll do shows on that also. There will be people who oppose that. But, sir, आप ये बताइए, आपका बिल जो आप इंट्रोड्यूस करना चाहते हो, does it have coercive methods? क्या वो कहता है कि women should be punished, जिसके भी 2 बच्चे से ऊपर है, they will not get rations, etc., etc.?
नहीं, अब इसकी डिटेल्स उसमें नहीं है. हमारा कहना है कि एक बार हाउस भी तो डिस्कस करे, उसमें कुछ चीजें निकल कर गए क्या हो सकता है. क्योंकि पेनलाइज करना या क्रिमिनलाइज करना किसी भी बिल को, ये उसका हल नहीं होता. परसुएशन भी होता है और बहुत बार यदि एक कोई बिल बनता है, एक बेंचमार्क हम लोग कानूनी निर्माण करते हैं, तो उसके आधार पर हम विभिन्न वर्गों को समझाने का हमारा एक आधार बनता है। उस हम कह सकते हैं कि देखो भाई, इट इज एन इशू एंड यू प्लीज बी सेंसिटिव रिगार्डिंग दिस। इस प्रकार की बातें हो सकती हैं, क्योंकि मैं ऐसा मानता हूं कि अक्रॉस द पार्टी लाइन एंड अक्रॉस द सोसाइटी डिफरेंट ग्रुप्स, everyone feels this. Yes, population is very much now.
All right. Poonam Mutreja, everyone feels this, that population is very high. India overtaking China in the headlines is always scary. It's attention grabbing. And many use this to advocate punishing those who have more than 2 children because of an alleged concern over India's burgeoning population. So is there a population like ticking time bomb like this actually, as people like Mr. Giriraj Singh claim?
So I don't understand if they have seen the data before they make the statements. Our numbers and its government figures that I'm referring to show that India's population is stabilizing. We have reached replacement level, which means that 2 parents have 1 child or 2 children, and that replaces that means there isn't an increase, and that's what replacement level is about. And 24 states in India have replacement level for fertility, which means population is going down. And for the sake of one of the people who asked, I think it was Sushmita Singh who asked the question about one community having more children, is not a community-based issue, whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Jain, Sikh. It depends on how educated the girl is and the income levels. So the better off in India have 2 or fewer children, but even those who have more children actually want fewer children. So again, the government data shows that there is a huge unwanted fertility in India. It is close to average 10%. In states like UP, it's higher. And then there are parts of India where it's higher. It means that there are people who don't wish to have more than 2 children average in India. But because they don't have, they are not educated, they are also not, they don't have the income levels where they can go and buy family planning services in the private sector, where there isn't much available. It is really the public sector has family planning services available. And finally, you know, Muslim growth rate has declined fastest as per India's census data over last 10 years. The slide began earlier, but last decade, Muslim population is growing, decreasing at a faster rate than Hindu Sikh population.
All right.
The problem,
you know, I want to pick up on 2 things. You talked about something interesting, that there are statistics and facts that show that women actually want to have less children. That's so scary. And given, you know, ironically, in 2017, you had the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, headed by a woman, Smriti Irani, then issuing an advisory to television channels saying you cannot show condom advertisements with sexually explicit content between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, one of our students over here raised a question about sex education. What about sex education? Is it hypocritical of our government to tell us that, you know, you will be punished for having more than 2 kids when there's no sex education in our schools? Or, in fact, to make it part of the curriculum under the new education policy proposed by the centre, there was a statement that it would have a negative impact on children. That is what an educational body affiliated to the BJP's ideological mentor, the RSS, said in 2019. I want to bring in at this point, I'm very glad to have on the show Dr. Thanaya. She is or otherwise known, aka as the Millennial Doctor. She's an award-winning Oxford University trained doctor who is very well known, talking with the youth about their body, about sex, about one's periods, etc., etc. And she's also the author of a book now, Conversations about Contraception, Menstruation, Safe Sex, etc., titled Dr. Cuterus, Everything Nobody Tells You About Your Body, published by Penguin India. So, Doctor, you have what, 997,000 followers. Many of them are young Indians. I just want to ask you one thing. How much ignorance is there in our youth about sex, about sexuality, about the birds and the bees and how babies are born.
Thank you for such a kind introduction. The questions are so fundamental in nature that it's alarming. You know, we are not taught anything about our bodies. We don't know the right names for our genitals. So in a situation like this, jab hame kuch bhi nahi pata hai, so how are we going to make intelligent, calculated decisions about child planning, about future decisions? And, you know, planning a child is a huge, huge decision. So we have so much good data to show that when you when you introduce the idea of education and access, automatically people choose to have fewer children. It's not that it's less of an enforcement issue and more of a education and access issue at this point.
So you're talking about planned babies. What about unplanned babies? I just want to ask you, since you have your finger on the pulse of the youth of India, are our policymakers aware or are they blind to the fact that more teens are having sex today? And how many of you in your interactions with the youth are using birth control, are aware of birth control, have access to birth control? Is it, I just want to ask any one of you, are you comfortable walking into a shop today and asking for birth control? Dr. Kuteris? No? So audience is saying no. You would be embarrassed? Why? Okay, on the mic, speak into the mic. Dr. Kuteris, go ahead. What have you learned?
I'm not surprised to hear that answer at all, very honestly. Just the way we treat, I mean, even say the condom advertisement you spoke about, it shows a very particular kind of image. You know, there's a sexy woman who's seducing her husband in a very, you know, she'll be in a low-cut sari, and it's going to be, there's a certain image that's being sent out in the way these advertisements are created. They're sending a message which means that, you know, young people are not having sex and people outside of marriage are not having sex, which is the opposite of the truth. There is an underground sexual revolution in India at the moment, which we refuse to acknowledge.
Underground sexual revolution in India, says Dr. Kuteris. The point is, are we woefully underprepared for this? I'm going to bring up another point. I think it was Ms. Zaidi raised. What would be the fallout of this? What would be the repercussions of a two-child norm if that becomes a policy? Let's bring in, we have a gynecologist over here. We have Dr. Archana Dhawan Bajaj, a gynecologist and obstetrician, IVF expert who joins us. Doctor, tell us about, what do you see? You know, we're in a country where people prefer to have sons, not just in rural India and urban India, it's well documented. What do you think would happen if we had a law that punished people from having more than 2 kids?
To be honest, let's first be very clear. We definitely need some kind of legislation to figure out how to control our population. Agreed that the fertility rate is dropping. People are preferring not to have more than 2 children, which is very good. But unfortunately, the kind of legislation that we are talking about is very drastic. Now, this drastic kind of legislation is going to give birth to a lot of underhand nefarious activity, which we, you know, often want to brush under the carpet.
Yeah.
Now, if you tell somebody who has 2 girls that they cannot have a 3rd child, irrespective of the fact that gender selection is not permitted in our country, blah, blah, the fact that somebody who can biologically procreate, whether it's the 3rd child is a male or a female, is something which nobody can govern, determine or decide.
Sure.
But to take away that basic instinct from a mother, to me as an obstetrician, doesn't sound very fair. So that is one point to look at things.
Apart from fair, do you think it could result in a setback to population stabilization efforts?
Absolutely it would. It would absolutely lead to a setback. And more than leading to a setback, we have to understand that, you know, we are a country which is a democracy. You cannot take away basic instincts, basic rights away from people. You need to educate people. You need to understand why people are procreating more.
Yeah.
Those that they are, why are they procreating more? You know,
and also I want to ask you, is there I mean, how easy or how difficult is it to have a safe abortion in India? Because let's say you had a law like this and people wanted not to be punished, what are their options?
See, the legislation on abortion in our country is very liberal, irrespective of what we may want to feel or no matter how much we would want to undermine this, but legislation in our country for abortions is very liberal.
Okay.
There is enough infrastructure available. All you need to do is educate people. You need to get out to the youth and tell them, look.
Okay, all you need to do is educate people, because the more educated you are, the less kids you have. That's what we found. Basically, the poorer you are, the more number of kids you are likely to have, possibly out of choice. I mean, no choice of yours. So let's bring in Ashwini Dubey then. You've heard your experts. They're pointing out this could actually be counterproductive. It could actually lead to the opposite happening of what the government says it wants to do, reduce the number of kids. So why should one continue to push these population control bills that that have punitive damages involved?
Thank you, Sarah, for having me here. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. In order to give everyone right to shelter, right to get the proper education, right to have the income equal to the other people, and in order to save the natural resources, the way the degradation of environment is taking place, the way the poverty is increasing, the way the unemployment is increasing, the food resources, religious and cultural constants. This is which is going in India. Now, two arguments which are extensively made by certain people who are
Sorry, Ashwini Dubey, hold on. There are 24 states that Poonam Mutreja has pointed out where they have achieved fertility rates below the replacement rates. They have not used coercive methods. How have they managed to do that? Kerala is not forcing anybody and saying you'll be punished. They have high education rates. They have better healthcare facilities. Women are more empowered. Has the government in states where they have not been able to control their population failed? And so they're taking this as an easy way out. Could that be a possibility?
When we see the this population, we don't see from the state to state. We just see the population as a country. Now, if we see the population explosion in the India, which is the root cause of the pitiable condition in international ranking, we are ranked 103rd. In the global 100.
That's the basic general knowledge, all students. Which is the most populous state in India? Let's ask.
Sarah, allow me to
UP and Bihar? The Maru states compared to the south?
We are ranked 103rd in the global hunger index, 43rd in the suicide rate, 168th in the literacy rate, 133rd in the World Happiness Index, 125th in the gender discrimination, 124th in the minimum pay, 42nd in the unemployment rate, 69th in the rule of law index, 43rd in the quality of life index. So I'm talking about the world perspective. 51st in the financial development index, 177th the environment.
So all right, Ashwini Dubey, let me ask you something. You're a lawyer. As a lawyer, how can you say that if you have a third child, you won't have, let's say, free education in schools? What happens to the basic right to education that our constitution says is due to every citizen? As a lawyer, respond there.
There's a Constitution of India and fundamental rights talk about that gives the right to equality, that is everyone should be treated equally. That says that the right to life is the fundamental right, right to live in a dignified manner, right to have the fresh air, right to have the clean water, right to have all the amenities is the fundamental right. The question here is, in order to bring the citizens at par in world context and in Indian context, in order to have the employment resources intact, in order to give the equal right to everyone, why don't we need a law? Why it should be seen in the eyes of the there's that religion? It is not the religion based. Like what happened in Madhya Pradesh, to contest the panchayat election.
Poonam Mutreja, we are running out of time. I want to wind up with you and give you the last word. What would happen if we did go ahead, as you know, we have our lawyer over here, Ashwini Dubey, saying we want to have equality for all, we want jobs for all, we want food for all, we want schools for all. But in the end, who would be at the receiving end? Who would be affected the most if such laws were to come into place?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I'm very happy to hear Mr. Dubey suddenly talk about a rights-based approach, and I really welcome it, and I hope everybody in his party will do so. Now, you're violating the right of the child as well as the woman who doesn't have the agency or access to family planning services. It is states which have good governance that have done well. We need better governance in the states of UP and Bihar, especially where health is concerned and access to family planning is concerned. So I wish he would talk about better governance too, amongst all the other good things that he's talked about. Now, all the points that he has made, we must invest in those areas. Nutrition, investing in it, in nutrition does not have much to do with how many children people have, especially the poor people.
Let me ask you, Poonam Mutreja, do you know how much of our budgets go towards family planning?
Yes, I will tell you, 6% only of our entire health budget, which is 1.4 of GDP, which is the lowest in the country, anywhere in the world, even if you look at developing countries. And of that little minus 6%, we spend only 4% on temporary methods. And we have a large youth population at a reproductive age, 27% men and 25% women who need temporary methods. Our budget, 85% of this meager 4% goes only on sterilization. So what do women do? They go through endless abortions and end up having more children than they want in any case. But one point allow me to make. If we had a bill come in, we will face the same consequences that China sadly has experienced with one-child norm, and now they want 3 children. They're giving incentives to have children. The women are the ones who will suffer because women will be penalized and the unborn will be penalized, and our sex ratios will decline further. And the Prime Minister keeps talking, and rightly so, about Beti Padhao, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, and this will be the anti-Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao.
So basically the women, and especially poor women, would be the worst hit. So the irony would be that you'll be punishing the poor. Instead of pulling them out of poverty, you will actually be pushing them further into poverty, says Poonam Mutreja over there. Thank you all. We're completely out of time, but thank you for joining us on We the People tonight.